Good day to everyone. I'm Phil Delso, President of the Evangelical Missionary Church of Canada. Welcome to our live stream forum on the Articles of Faith. As you are no doubt aware because you're participating in this, and we welcome you to this session. This is a bit of an experiment to us. We are preparing ourselves for the consideration of an amendment to our Articles of Faith. We have not worked on our Articles of Faith since 1993. We've talked about it. We've felt that there was probably a need to work on this. And so in advance of this, the Constitutional Commission has been working on this for some time. There was a draft of this material that was presented at Assembly 2 years ago, 2010 or 11, and now we have the opportunity to once again move the next step forward. We're so thankful that Graham Burkhart, who is the chair of the Constitutional Commission, he's pastor of our New Dundee Church, and he has been involved in the constitutional process, in the Articles of Faith process for, I think, well over 30 years. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Graham. We're so glad that you're joining with us today. God bless you as we seek to serve Him together. Graham?
Thank you. We're anticipating being able to move forward in a process that we began, as mentioned, a couple of years ago. At that assembly, when we discussed some possibilities, I also went out to solicit some additional help, and we did have some people who volunteered and came forward, some others that we went after and asked if they would be interested in helping. As time progressed, a few that had started with us because of different things in their lives needed to pull back somewhat. And so over the last while, those who were most involved in preparing this proposal were Jim Sclater from British Columbia, Jeff Johnson from Alberta, Graham Gessler from Ontario, and myself. And so only half of us were Grahams, so I guess that's not too overloaded. What did initiate the whole process and the discussion? Why are we doing this? It was noted by some people along the way that the wording in much of our statement of faith is dense theological language. The reason for the density of it is to be able to express things in a concise fashion and to be able to position relative to a lot of discussions throughout history on areas of faith. Strange as it may seem, not everybody regularly participates in reading dense theological statements. Strangely enough, not everybody enjoys reading dense theological statements, but it's more the issue of comprehensibility that was at issue. Some people were saying that they don't quite understand what the wording is, and so there was some interest in moving toward a more simplified expression of our statement. One of the things that certainly develops as well is as people look at a statement and look at varied interpretations of what that statement is saying. It's a fact of the matter that whenever you do put down words, there is a certain interpretation that takes place. Maybe an emphasis or a particular part of the statement that takes predominance. In order to work with that reality, our credentialing bodies have, over the years, focused on a number of things that are essential. And from time to time, a candidate for credentialing might come forward and suggest a way that they would understand a passage, and instead of gaining complete historical agreement with what might have been meant and is meant by everyone, there was a list of essentials that were defined. Those essentials, we find them in the document Christ at the Center. Those essentials are items of evangelical orthodoxy, not unlike the things that we would find in our statement of faith of the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. So those essentials certainly became a necessary touchstone for those who are credentialed. But the other thing within our statement of faith were issues of heritage. And so, even if someone might have a little bit of a different understanding that another person might have had, the question was whether this candidate for credentialing can work within this historical context that is now the Evangelical Missionary Church of Canada, and whether we can work together cooperatively. So with these things, what happened then is we had our statement of faith, the longer version of that statement of faith, and we had what became a very short statement of essentials. Sometimes there was some confusion as to which we in fact had as our statement of faith. These all came together, and looking at whether we can come with a statement of faith that would be shorter and simpler in declaration than what we have at present, and that even though those essentials will still stand because they serve for us as a good foundation, yet what we've sought to do is to bring those essentials in as part of our statement of faith, as it were the short form of the longer statement. One of the things in this whole process that was observed and has been noted by the National Board is what we suggested is the need for more opportunity for teaching, whether we are talking about a catechism, whether we're talking about study papers, whether we're talking about more opportunity for us to discuss across the nation on these things. But that aside, we still do need to have a statement, a declaration that serves us as a body. I wanted to speak for a moment or two with regard to the order of our statement of faith. You will notice that there is very little change from the present to the proposed, and we have set this out for you and put it online as 2 columns for your convenience, and I trust you found that helpful. What we have done in changing the order is we've moved the statement about the Bible forward. So rather than starting with a statement about God, we start with a statement about the Bible. It's not that we think any less of God as the first in the order of being, but we recognize that it is through the Bible that we know who God is. We're dealing with a statement of faith, and so we start with the foundation on how we know what we are now declaring in this statement. And so that's one of the main reasons for us to do this, and it seems that in the day in which we live, it is important to recognize what authorities we are leaning on. Maybe another comment that I'll make before we start looking a little bit at the detail, and I'm not going to look point by point at this. You have it in written form. We're going to dialogue about it as well in a few moments, and so that you have opportunity to put in your questions and to discuss it. And if you are online, you can put in your questions with regard to this. Whether you use the live stream chat, whether you use Twitter, email, there's many opportunities for you to put in your comment and question. But in light of that, I just wanted to make one comment, and a couple of people noticed it. We have received a few emails already, that under the statement about humanity, there was this orphan word, charades. And I just thought I'd comment with regard to that. I was participating in an online seminar, and they were having audio difficulties. And so, being a little tongue-in-cheek, I was typing into that sidebar about perhaps we could use charades. And as I was typing it, I thought, am I right in how I spell charades? So I just had this document open in another window on my computer, popped to that window, typed in charades, wasn't flagged, and so then I went back and typed it in. And tongue-in-cheek suggested, as in that presentation, it could be 1,250 words, first word. The word charades did not get deleted from this document before it went out. So that's the orphan. I don't think it will survive editing. One of the things that we have done, in addition to statement of faith, and this historically has been our practice now over quite some period of time in the missionary church and now in the Evangelical Missionary Church, the practice has been to have, in addition to our statement of faith, to have position papers available. we have not done a lot of position papers, but what it does is it gives us an opportunity to discuss in a little bit more extensive form some things that are mentioned within our statement of faith. Perhaps as we abbreviate our statement of faith, it will be more valuable to us to look at more of these statements and position papers. However, going back to what was said before, in many of these cases what we need to start with is we're going to need to start with a discussion of a study paper to be able to look together at some of these things. We have already received some excellent response in email to this proposal that's before us, and if we could engage in more of this sort of discussion, it would be very helpful for us. One of the things as well that happened along the way that became somewhat of an impetus, but also you will see some reflection in this document, is the fact that some of our churches, wanting to have a document that was more accessible to their people, have been involved in a process of amending and proposing an amendment to their own local statement of faith. So rather than adopting in total the Evangelical Missionary Church of Canada statement of faith, they have established their own, which they sought to be consistent with the denominational statement, even though perhaps the wording was somewhat altered. With regard to credentialing, the people within that church likewise stood under the denominational statement, but for their use in the local congregation, they had their amended statement. With this in view, we do have an interest in trying best as we can to have churches and the Evangelical Missionary Church of Canada as a whole be as much in alignment as possible. We recognize the need that was there. We were lagging somewhat from those local churches, and they moved forward. For those who are familiar with the statement that was produced and published by the Center Street Church, you may notice in this proposal some things that look familiar. We did have that as one of the things that we were looking at as we were working through this statement. So there will be some things of familiarity there to you. And I would be even so bold as to suggest that our hope, even though we understand that once these things are set in place, there is little desire to reopen the discussion immediately, we understand that it might take a little bit of time, but our hope would be that we could come again to bring all these statements together. Some of the comments that we've received to this point have looked at some punctuation details and so on, and we have taken note of those things. This form is not in final edited form yet, and it will be polished somewhat before it's finally produced, but we do thank you for those contributions. We also have received some contributions and some suggestions, some comments and questions relative to some particular areas of this document. One of the questions in the form of question, we'll get an opportunity perhaps to talk about this a little bit later on as well, is with regard to the Wesleyan Arminian heritage that has been part of the Evangelical Missionary Church of Canada. There are some things that we have not carried over in our statements in the proposals that would speak to this heritage. There are other things that certainly have. So just by way of example, and a statement on security of the believer is not always tied directly to the notion of a Wesleyan Arminian statement, but under our statement about salvation, there is a mention there of our security being in our continuing relationship with Christ. And this, I would suggest, is a Wesleyan Arminian interpretation of security. One of the things that ties this document together as we move through it, and there's always that question of what are some of the threads that will flow through it to make it a more readable document than what it might be otherwise. One of the things that flows through this document is the aspect of relationship with God through Jesus Christ. So as we look at issues of Jesus, relationship of Jesus with the Father, relationship of the Son with the Father, and relationship of the Spirit with the Father and the Son. And as we look at the relationship of believers in the church, but more particularly with God through his saving grace, you will find there things that speak of relationship. Certainly when we get to the statements about things to come, there is a focus there on issues of relationship, our relationship to God, and how decisions that we make in this world greatly affect what is our eternal relationship with God. One of the comments that we received is that, as we jump ahead to things to come, some notice was made of that heaven and hell are not focused on at that particular point, but it might relate again to this aspect of relationship, and that in this document we did not focus so much on place as on that aspect of relationship with Christ. As we look further at this document, and I trust that you've had opportunity to look at it, and I trust that you found it helpful to be able to compare, you will see that in many cases what we have done is we have taken sections in our present document and simply tried to reword it in a way that captures the detail without using the more dense language. You also understand that to shorten a document and to keep what is otherwise fairly dense vocabulary, those are two exclusive priorities. So in other words, there are things that perhaps will be missed in the wording that's there. But what we've sought to do is to be able to carry the ideas, to be able to carry forward an understanding of what we in fact believe. But may it be as well that we carry forward the spirit of what we believe. So a statement of faith is not simply a shopping list, but it conveys in large measure who we are as a people. If we could look just at a couple of details now as well, and we will get into a few. With regard to the statement about God, we have continued that statement by looking first of all at a statement about God, and then looking at the three persons of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Those statements are not a lot shorter, but one of the things that we described and spoke about, and we included that perhaps was not fleshed out a little bit in quite the same way in our present statement, is in our proposed statement with regard to Jesus Christ. We included the fact that he came to reveal the Father, announce the coming of God's kingdom, and then likewise to offer himself up as a sinless atoning sacrifice to pay the penalty for sin. So that aspect of revealing the Father and announcing the coming kingdom were included. One of the things that you'll see as well throughout this document is that perhaps even though the word sent is not here, there is a missional aspect that we find. So it speaks of the Lord Jesus in fulfilling his earthly ministry, the earthly mission of his first coming. It speaks of his perfect life on our behalf. But his earthly mission is spoken of there. When we look at the statement with regard to the church, we find as well the word mission. The notion of mission is one of the things that moves us forward as we look at the relationship of believers together in ministry and service together. Mission also speaks of that relationship that we have with the world. The mission of the church is to love and worship God in a spirit of unity, to teach the Word of God, to celebrate communion and baptism, to join together in fellowship, worship, and prayer, to encourage and equip one another to be fully devoted followers of Christ, to help the spiritually lost enter into a relationship with Jesus, and to advance God's kingdom in the world. Mission and relationship spoken of in that passage. One of the things that has been certainly part of our life as a denomination is understanding the work of the Holy Spirit to be a personal work. And so when we look at our statement with regard to our belief in the Holy Spirit, seeing that there's this need of His saving work by calling us to Christ. So in our present statement, we find these words: the Holy Spirit, proceeding from the Father and being sent by the Son, is one substance, majesty and glory, with the Father and the Son, very and eternally God. That does certainly count as dense statement. We are proposing that we would have, we believe in the Holy Spirit, who is fully God, and while not to be confused with the Father and Son, remains one with the Father and the Son in being, majesty, and glory. So trying to express in words that are maybe a little bit more familiar type of terminology, to be able to express the very same idea. You will notice we did not get into the discussion in our proposal with regard to whether the procession was from the Father and the Son or merely the Father. We did leave that discussion behind in our proposal. But as we look at what we've identified in our present statement as being the work of the Holy Spirit, to reprove or convict the world of sin, of righteousness, and of judgment, we have used words that speak of the need of a saving relationship with God, and then we've couched together those things of reproving or convicting the world of sin and of righteousness. We've tied those things together in that phrase, the need of a saving relationship with God. If indeed all what's in our present that I just mentioned, reprove and convict the world of sin and of righteousness and of judgment, if that is caught by a phrase like need of a saving relationship with God, then it perhaps suggests to us that really it would be helpful for us to have additional position papers or teaching pieces that we can flesh out the detail of that. So this serves as an example for us, and we'll have opportunity to discuss a little bit more about the specific details, whether or not we have sufficiently caught those things that need to be caught. Well, that's one of the reasons for this discussion today. That's why we're doing this. We look for your feedback. We look for the opportunity to dialogue further about it. We have worked on this to this point, but we're not done till assembly.
Thanks, Graham. The saying is that if you want something done, you ask a busy man to do it. And Graham certainly is busy as a pastor, busy, engaged in, I think, a very dynamic family setting, and also completing a PhD program in Manchester. And Graham, your particular area of research is in Arminius, and specifically what area?
Well, Arminius is certainly the focus that I'm following, but also in contemporary theology. I'm working on a response to open theism from the thought of Arminius. So I'm interacting with Arminius, who is late 15, early 1600s, and using some of his thought, which I think is dynamic and powerful for us to consider, and looking at some of the contemporary discussions and what he would have to say for us in this present discussion. And so it's profitable in both contemporary and historical theology.
So thank you for being willing once again to continue in your role as chair of the Constitutional Commission and for the work in advancing the project. I want to maybe just go back a little bit and pick up on some of the other things that I think have been important in our journey together as a family of churches. One of the things that the founding president of the merged national church, evangelical and missionary, he used to say that we want to include all those whom Christ includes. And there's been something of that positive ecumenical spirit in the whole thrust of where we've gone. I came into this family in 1982, and one of the things I noted even back then was, first of all, that there was a willingness to include individuals who were evangelical and orthodox, but who didn't necessarily cross all the T's and dot all the I's in the family. And that what was important was whether or not there was a willingness to work together for the cause of Christ. And so I think that this has been a significant part of that ethos. It's reflected in the Christ at the Center statement, in which we are looking for unity in essentials, liberty in non-essentials, and love in all things. And I think that that's a commendable thing. This has been a good home for me and my family, for my ministry since 1982. So here we are at a particular juncture in which there are certain areas which continue to provide a bit of a rub as particularly pastors and leaders come to us from other streams. And we have a wide variety of individuals who come from a wide variety of evangelical streams and evangelical schools. And in the course of our credentialing, we have found a way to embrace them, and that has been, I think, a good thing. But it does mean that as we look at our articles of faith, it would be good for us to, as I said way back when I became part of this family, if we would say what we mean and mean what we say. And we know that there is no such thing as a perfect statement, but if we can have one that serves us well and serves us as we go forward in our sentness as the servants of Jesus, I think that would be really valuable. I don't know if you have any response to that.
Well, just thinking, one of the things that people ask me, what do you see as being a strength, or maybe start with a weakness of the Evangelical Missionary Church of Canada? And maybe one of the things we could point to as a weakness is that we do not have a seminary, a training grounds through which people come, and that they've processed some things together, and that we have, as it were, a particular way of articulating particular statements of faith. And then if they would say, well, then what's his strength? And I would say, well, just as the weakness was that we don't have one stream whereby people come through and articulate everything the same way, I would also say that our strength is that we do not have everybody coming through one particular stream articulating everything in the same way. So I think when we look at the breadth of experience, whether it's college or seminary experience, thinking in terms of just a few that I know of the schools that are involved, I quickly came up with a list of about 7 or 8 seminaries that the people have studied at, and that's probably a limited list. And so we will have people who maybe in many ways hold at heart very similar ideas, but articulate them differently. And I think that's one of the things that we have to be watching for. But then in our discussion together, can we set a forum where we can discuss these things and come to understanding on them together? And so this is one of the difficulties perhaps in the project that we're involved in right now. We're looking at putting particular words to these things. And sometimes it takes more discussion to understand what exactly someone means and how they're articulating the point of view.
Let me express my appreciation to you and to the Constitutional Commission again for the significant work that you've done. This has been back and forth any number of times. And I express that as certainly a part of the EMCC family, but also in speaking on behalf of the board, I know that they have expressed great appreciation for what you've undertaken. And thank you for those who have already begun to contribute substantially to this process. There have been a number of emails that have come in, and some interesting ideas, some interesting concerns expressed. On the whole, I think an appreciation for the process. One of the things I've noticed is that there hasn't been any particular reaction to the simplifying of the statement on things to come. Do you have any comment on that?
I don't have any particular comment on the lack of reaction or to that, but I think one of the things that we look at is we realize that our present statement is a premillennial statement. It has a particular take on what is within wider Christianity, quite a conversation. what we have done in our proposed statement, without attaching to the sequence that is oftentimes there, and whether it's a pre-mill, a post-mill, an a-mill type of position, we have articulated that we believe in God's intervention. Mm-hmm. And so that God intervenes in the affairs of this world. And so that we hope we've caught the spirit that's included within the description that we have presently, without necessarily the specificity that is there at present. One of the things we have had a little bit of response to this is with regard to our present statement does speak of heaven, hell, mm-hmm. and our proposal does not. As a matter of fact, it points to a new heaven and a new earth rather than heaven as being, as it were, the eternal dwelling place, mm-hmm. and of the believers. And so that is a little bit of a change, and I'll look forward to what discussion we have on that particular point. I think it's a biblically grounded point, mm-hmm. and it seems to be part of the wider discussion as well in evangelical circles these days.
And I think it's important to recognize in the process that we are servants of our larger family in this process, and we want to listen in the course of arriving at a consensus. And so this live stream is part of it. It's certainly not the whole thing, but it is certainly part of it.
I think one of the things that I mentioned to you along the way is that I come at this as one who had no problems whatsoever signing the statement that we had in place, mm-hmm. and so I really wasn't looking for something extra to do by undertaking this. But I appreciate and understand the board's desire to do this, having heard from many of our churches that they desire this to be done.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, thanks for what you've undertaken to this point, and the process is not over. Your work's not done. Another thing which was mentioned in the course of responding by email was on what seems like a narrowing of perspective on the effects of the atonement. And I wonder if you might comment on that in particular.
Mm-hmm. And this did appear certainly in the statement with regard to Jesus. I mentioned a little bit to it before. We did introduce the words pay the penalty for sin, which would be seen as a narrowing. But at the same time, we introduced the ideas of revealing the Father and obviously the coming of God's kingdom to that. So we're looking at countering that a little bit. But I think there has been some thoughtful suggestion that maybe that narrowing is not needed. In our present statement speaks of the atoning work of Christ, atonement through his vicarious death, mm-hmm. dying in our place. I think in our discussion, and again, we're trying to wrestle with how do we capture the words, what's meant by our present statement. How do we capture it in words that are more accessible? Mm-hmm. And that notion of vicarious death, why did he die? And why was it a vicarious death? Well, he died the death we deserved. Mm-hmm. And why did we deserve it? Because of our sin. And so that the penalty of sin is certainly there.
Yeah, it's a reality.
It's a reality. And
it flows out of Genesis with the fall in Genesis 3, and then the place that the atoning blood has, beginning back in Genesis, and is so evident in explicit statements like, without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sins, and so on.
So that was our attempt. I mean, so in one sense, it could be seen as narrowing, and it was suggested that there are other benefits as well in addition to that. I mean, there's quite a long list of things that we could list as being benefits that fall to us from the cross. Victory over sin, power over sin.
That's right.
The guilt is God. He bore our guilt, and so on. So this was our attempt to capture what was intended by the word vicarious and vicarious death.
But it might be good to just revisit that and see if there isn't a way of just sharpening that, so it doesn't seem like it's a narrowing on the penal aspect of the atonement. So that's good.
And maybe at the same time is not necessarily that we have to make the larger list. And I think in line with this too, the comment was there that that it seems that we in this proposal have really a summary statement with regard to salvation. If you look at this is probably the greatest place where space was saved, because we reduced the statement on salvation probably the most of any. And saying, well, this is just a summary statement. Well, I guess my response would be that given the riches of what Christ has given us in his saving work, I would suggest that our present statement is a summary. And so that it's whether the summary, the present one or the proposed one, whether it points us in the right direction to understand what it is that Christ has given us. And again, maybe this is one of the places where we need to be providing teaching materials as well that make it available to people. Interestingly enough, the very people who might say, well, this is just a summary statement, are the ones who also have in mind all the riches of and be able to articulate those themselves. But so we're not suggesting that here's a limitation on what Christ has done, but does it point us in the right direction? And are these things that we do desire that people in our family would hold?
Yeah. I think that's a useful idea to think about. Does this point us in the right direction, rather than is it exhaustive or comprehensive in everything that's included? So that's a very useful idea.
Maybe I should mention something else as well. I think I alluded to it, but I don't think I completed the thought. Our practice has been that we do not generate position papers unless we make some statement of it in the statement of faith. And so, for example, we have just the briefest mention of the security of the believer, shortening down considerably the statement that we have at present, but we have a position paper on that. And so we were kind of working through this and said, oh, we want to continue our practice to only have position papers that relate to our statement of faith. We do need something in that. And as I said before, what we have is a fairly Arminian statement on security.
To jump to another area, the area of marriage, that's never been addressed particularly in our Articles of Faith. And do you want to comment at all in the inclusion of something, again, a trajectory, a direction in the present offering?
As times change, different things become highlighted. And this was one of the things that our board looked to us to say, is there somewhere that we could, within this statement, have something that relates to the statement of marriage? And what we did is, in our statement about humanity, we recognize that humankind is a special creation of God. God created us in his image, male and female, and with the intention, again, to have a loving relationship with him and with one another. So that speaks to the whole of humanity and God's desire for us. But then also we've recognized within this, and tied together now with that statement, is recognizing that God has intended that the family, based on covenant marriage between one man and one woman, to be the norm and model for the human community. So we didn't want it just to appear as a bit of a tag-on, but it is a fairly significant inclusion in our statement of faith at this particular juncture in the life of Canada and what we're seeing in our wider world. Perhaps it helps us along the way. In addition to that, we've continued as well a statement that was in our present document with regard to the value of the human being from conception, and so that we've continued that as well.
I think that's helpful to note, that even though it's not a very big phrase, it is an important addition to this particular statement. Something else that came up was whether or not there is enough about the mission of God, whether or not that's well enough reflected in the statement about the church, or maybe elsewhere in this statement.
Well, I guess relating again to the notion of position papers and so on, the question maybe would be, is there sufficient here to develop more, without having this a whole document about the mission of God in the world? We do speak under the statement about Jesus Christ. We do speak about his earthly mission. So that word is used there. Under the church, mission is used. And so those aspects, I think we had a thoughtful consideration that talked specifically about that aspect of the mission of God. And I think it's something we will want to look at. But to this point, we've kind of looked at these things. And I'm not saying that this is fully answered what I think is a very interesting and valid comment. And very apropos given our missional emphasis.
Yeah. I think that the contributions that have come in so far have been very helpful, very useful, and it would be good to just see that continue. We're looking forward to what will happen at Assembly as well in the conversation. One of the correspondents was looking forward to the, as he said, lively discussion, and we certainly hope that it's lively. We certainly pray that it will be with warm hearts and cool heads as well. And this has been, I think, a very healthy process for us. Graham, we are not tackling the articles of practice in this. And can you give us some reason why we aren't tackling that?
I think primarily is because that it was the Articles of Faith that were primarily flagged as being in need of some assistance. The Articles of Practice, strangely enough, seem to be more practical, and that it didn't seem to be a problem. But as we looked at them, there are some things there that in wording and so on we'll want to work on, but we haven't done that at this point in time. I think one of the things with regard to what we have in our document, there's some crossover. For example, in our Article of Practice, we have a statement on our ordinances, being communion and baptism. What we did in this particular document, we took the word ordinances out and replaced it with what we identify in the Articles of Practice as being our ordinances, being communion and baptism. And so that we sought to simplify this, and this is the statement on the church, as what we gathered to do. So instead of celebrating the ordinances, we celebrate communion and baptism. And those are some of the things that we do. So again, just seeking to make the vocabulary approachable, and if somebody is reading it and doesn't necessarily understand ordinances. But one of the things that might be helpful for us to discuss as well is a question, and this would be something for us to perhaps do in a position paper, is why do we speak of them as ordinances and not sacrament? And that is part of our practice. You notice we do not in our denominational documents have the word sacrament there. We speak of ordinances. And as well the discussion, and some might say, well, if we look at ordinances as being those things that Christ set up, what about foot washing? Part of our Mennonite heritage and so on. And so that might be helpful for us to discuss. I guess some of that stuff, I'm not convinced it has to be entrenched here. That there are some other things that we can discuss in line with that.
Yeah. What's important for us to continue to move forward and make common cause in the mission that the Lord has entrusted to us. So coming back to the idea of mission, however, there were some other suggestions about how perhaps to enrich the description of the church, for example, being the body of Christ and so on. Would you have any thoughts about how that might be incorporated, or why what's presently there might be sufficient to get us where we need to go?
Well, it's certainly something. It was a suggestion that came in earlier in the week, and I think it certainly merits some really good looking at it. Among other things, it's biblical. I mean, it is a biblical description, and so there are some of those descriptors, and I think in addition to what we have, which does speak of mission and what we're doing together and how the church is seen in the world, and I mean that becomes a whole missional statement, even though the word sent and so on might not be there predominantly, and maybe the word mission only shows up once. It really is a missional statement that we have there. But I think this is one of the areas that the comment that we received so far would serve us well to have a look at that again. I thought it was a very thoughtful comment.
If I might bring you back to the fact that you moved the statement about the Bible to the beginning. And by the way, I appreciate how these are statements about and how you've used that consistently. I think that also brings an additional nuance to how these statements might be viewed and used. You know that there are certain trigger words that have been important in evangelical circles. Do you want to comment at all about how you've come to this particular wording?
Well, one of the words that, if you go searching this, the word inerrancy is not there, and this could raise a question, and rightfully so. In our present statement with regard to the Bible, we do use the word inerrancy, and then we also are quick to go on in the description of that in matters of faith and practice and so on. So that becomes the major focus of our statement, even though we use the word inerrancy. And there's some discussion as to whether infallibility and inerrancy ultimately mean the same thing. I think even in the Chicago Declaration, there was a wide recognition that they are related, and related strongly. We used the word infallible, not that we were infallible in doing so, but that we used that word infallible as really, in our present statement, it is focusing on those things of faith and practice, faith and conduct. And so we carry it along in that. But the notion of being entirely trustworthy, only final authority in all matters of faith and conduct. And but what we also did in that statement is we fleshed out a little bit why we could have that confidence. So instead of just talking in throwing out some terms, inerrancy, infallibility, inspiration, and so on, we described what we believe to be the way that God even superintended the whole procedure. And so,
there's no reference to the original autographs here.
We don't have those. And in some ways, oftentimes with the statement of inerrancy, then the original autographs get mentioned.
Yeah.
And instead of getting into that particular discussion, we focus more on what we do have and why we can trust it. And so we looked at those aspects of belief. So that's what we have, and certainly I think this is one of the areas where I would hope that we would have some good dialogue and discussion on it.
Thus far, we haven't had any comments, though, in the written responses to this.
No.
One, have we? So,
well, I shouldn't say that. I think there was one.
There was one. Yes. Okay. So, have we got anything that's coming in right now to us that we should include? Because we would like to, as we're wrapping things up, still have time to include those things. So they're about to come, are they? All right. Thanks for the crew that's in here helping. We're thankful for the number of people that are involved in putting on even a simple little basic live stream like this. And so thanks for being willing to undertake this. Graham, you might want to just address, as we're waiting for this question, how you see the process flowing through in General Assembly.
Well, I anticipate that everybody will rise up, say it's wonderful, and just vote it all in. Well, maybe not. We really have a few options. The one would be to approve the proposal.
Sure.
That would be an option. A good option, I think, but an option. The other would be to reject it, to vote it down. And what that would leave us with is our present statement, which likewise is a serious attempt to articulate our faith as a people. The other option would be to embrace it as a working document that basically it's saying, good so far, maybe we'd like to look at this a little bit more in 2 years, and so next time we meet in assembly we'll look at it again. So those would be some of the options open to us. But I think before we get to that point, we do have a couple of weeks, and that's part of the reason for this discussion now and bringing this forward. The National Board meets 2 weeks from today, and at that point in time, well, we've got a meeting going on, but I'm going to be meeting with the National Board 2 weeks from today, and this will be part of our discussion. And if there are things to change in the proposal that we work on between now and then we could come forward with that at that point. So we do have a bit of a timeline here, and so would like if people can respond and anything that they get into us will be taken into consideration through this period as well. So that at assembly, there will be those opportunities that I mentioned. Prior to assembly, there's a 2-week window that people can interact with it, and we can make some substantive change.
Mm-hmm. Very good. One of the questions that's come in is how do we as EMCC leadership expect the statement to be used in the local church, just in credentialing or in membership? And Graham, I think you've addressed that in some measure, but it's been a bit of an issue in terms of having the resources and having confidence that we were on the same page. And so I see that there will be real value in having everyone on the same page. I know that a number of congregations have drafted their own statements, and not that they were in disagreement with the EMCC statement, but it was another layer. And then they would use that as the basis for their membership preparation. I think that this could serve us really well.
I think part of the lack has been, over the last while, we haven't had those tools. I still on my shelf have a couple of books. One is from the Missionary Church, Inc., when we were still together with the American Church, and it was a children's catechism. I don't think they called it that, but it was a training tool to teach children the faith. The pictures, I think even the adults would enjoy. But then I also have these little books of some of the early catechisms that were available, and there was a great deal of effort put into that teaching and communication, and maybe even more important today than ever. And we're just experimenting with some technologies that are available to us as well.
I've been in conversation with Lucas Van Bischoten from our Center Street Church, because there is a catechism effort that had been developed, but again, it needs to be brought up to date. And one of the pieces, of course, is to be secure in the articles of faith that we're going to use as the basis for that catechism. So appreciative of Lucas's interest, because Lucas has a real heart for teaching and the preparation of children. And so I think that once we have a strong sense of what the common articles of faith would be, that this will help us substantially in moving ahead with this process. Let me move along. Here's another question. And this is in the statement about God. The character of God, unchanging, loving, just, has been removed. That's how the question's phrased. What are the reasons for excluding these here?
It's not that we don't believe that God is continuing, unchanging, loving, just. Again, the relationship was focused on in the sense of one true living and holy God, self-existent, eternal, personal spirit, who alone is a creator, sustainer, and ruler of all things. Eternally existent, three persons of the Trinity. So, I mean, this was the primary statement about God, and then speaking of Father, Son, and Spirit. Why were those things not included? Sometimes what you do in a statement of faith is position yourself relative to those things that are controversial. And I guess one of the questions that might come up, particularly with the word unchanging, is in some of the present discussions, some of the areas that I'm working on intensely and working on a response to is particularly in that aspect of unchanging, God's unchanging nature. I think it's a good question. It's something that we could certainly look at again. It was our thought that we've caught in the relationship and the person of God these aspects of his eternality, his self-existence, and personal spirit. I mean, with regard to why personal spirit, when we're talking about God, we're not talking about an additional person in addition to the Father and the Son and the Spirit. But he is personal. God is personal. So he's not impersonal. And there are some movements in contemporary theology that would see God as an impersonal force or so on. And we don't identify with those.
But that contribution is certainly an important one to ask that question. Now, here's another one. Why the movement away from the conscious rejection of Christ under salvation in being outside security? I don't know exactly what that means. Maybe you've got an idea where this one's going.
Well, I think what the question relates to is something that we cover in our statement on the security of the believer. And so that if you look at the statement that we have, the position paper on the security of the believer, we do have a much longer statement than that. So we've opted for a briefer statement in our statement of faith because we do have a position paper that details that more.
We are in the final moments of this session. We have an additional comment. I just think I'll just refer to it. We use the statement of faith on our website. While I and our church agree that marriage is between one man and one woman, I'm not sure we want to hit visitors with that message at the door. I think we'll just note that we received that. And then someone else who says, thank you for the open discussion about changes, additions, and so on. Worth particular attention. This was a worthwhile hour. So that encourages us as we are learning to do this more effectively. So we are about to wrap up the session. Again, let me express my deep appreciation, Graham. You've been a partner in these projects ever since I can remember, and your persistence, your willingness to contribute has meant a great deal to us as a national family, and thanks to those who served with you. Thanks that we do have representation in BC, in Alberta, as well as Ontario. And I don't think you're closed to having others participate in this process.
Not in the slightest.
Not in the slightest. In fact, out of some of the contributors, it might well be that there will be others that are invited to join in the work of the Constitutional Commission, because we really do depend on the vital life of the body as a whole and the rich theological thought that's there. So again, let me invite you to join us for National Assembly, General Assembly, May 6th through 8th, and pray that God will guide us, because after all, we are on mission, and we want to serve Him. We want to serve Him well in these days, and we want to indeed communicate in a way that is clear, that is affirmative, that shows the beauty and the attractiveness of the Lord that we serve. So God bless you, and thank you so much for your willingness to participate in these ways.